They say soul food is fried chicken and sweet tea. But during the civil rights era, it was something else. Survival. These meals were quiet weapons, cooked in church basements, tiny kitchens, and safe houses, served to the tired, the grieving, the brave. Dr. King said, everybody can be great because everybody can serve. And behind every plate was someone serving strength. Most of those dishes, forgotten. But if you stay with me, you'll uncover 25 soul foods that helped fuel a movement and why they should have never been left behind. This is 25 forgotten soul foods that fueled the civil rights era. Let's remember them together. 1. Philadelphia pepper pot soup. They called it the soup that won the war back in the Revolution, but by the time of the civil rights era, it had a new meaning in black kitchens. This was no ordinary stew. It started with cow tripe, the stomach, tough and rubbery at first, but cooked long enough, it turned soft and rich. Cassava thickened it with peppers, onions, and herbs tossed in like memories. It was bold. It was bitter. It was ours. During the winter of '63, when marches ran cold and long, this soup warmed hands and hearts. Folks ate it from metal pots by church steps in North Philly, fuel for another night of freedom meetings. Some say it smelled too strong, too funky. But to us, that smell was home. It filled kitchens where folks whispered plans and ironed Sunday best. And when you dipped your spoon in that dark broth, it didn't just feed your body, it told you, we've been here. We still here. That bowl reminded us that even scraps could carry power. 2. Blackbird stew. Now this was for folks who knew how to make a meal out of nothing. Blackbird stew was made from birds caught out in the fields, sometimes with slingshots, sometimes with traps made from string and sticks. They'd pluck the feathers, gut the birds, and drop them into a pot with onions, greens, and whatever roots they could find. Add water, maybe a splash of vinegar, and let it simmer low till the meat fell off the bone. During the rural boycotts of '61, this stew was a lifeline, especially in places where folks were fired from jobs just for registering to vote. When money got tight and store shelves were off limits, folks turned to the land, and the land gave back. When you shared that pot, you weren't just eating, you were surviving together. Out on the back steps or under moonlight on old porches, elders passed down the know-how to catch a bird, how to stretch a meal, how to stay proud with a belly half full. That stew held more than meat. It held memory. 3. Raccoon stew. Some folks today might turn their nose up, but back then, raccoon stew was a meal you didn't waste. Down in the Gullah communities and across the Mississippi Delta, folks would skin that raccoon clean, soak it in salt water overnight, they'd cook it slow with onions, peppers, maybe a touch of vinegar or tomato. The meat was dark, rich, a little greasy, but when it was done right, it slid right off the bone. During the winter of 1960, after the first wave of student sit-ins, many young folks came home bruised and hungry. Some had lost their scholarships. Some lost their jobs. But when Grandma set a pot of raccoon stew on the stove, it meant you were still covered, still loved, no matter what the world took away. That pot didn't judge. It just filled the room with the kind of smell that told you you're still part of this family. And when everybody sat close, steam rising from chipped bowls, you could feel it. How food like this held folks together tighter than fear ever could. 4. Baked possum with sweet potatoes. Now don't laugh. Back then, possum was country gold. If you caught one fat off the persimmon tree, you had dinner and a story. Folks would clean it real careful, rub it down with salt, sometimes parboil it first, then roast it slow in the oven with sweet potatoes all around. The meat was gamey but tender, and them sweet potatoes soaked up every bit of that juicy fat, sticky, caramelized, and rich like molasses. During the harsh winter of '62 in Georgia, When SNCC organizers were sleeping on church floors and hiding from night riders, this dish was served hot by families who didn't have much, but gave everything. One elder said, "Ain't no room for fear when your belly full and your people standing tall." That smell of roasting possum and sweet yam told you were safe for the night, and maybe tomorrow too. It wasn't just about feeding the body, it was about keeping the fire lit, in the stove, in the home, and deep down in the soul. 5. Fried buffalo fish ribs. They called it poor man's ribs, but out in the Mississippi Delta, fried buffalo fish ribs were rich in flavor and pride. Buffalo fish ain't easy to clean, full of tiny bones and thick scales, but the folks who knew what they were doing could carve out the rib racks just right. They'd dredge them in cornmeal, fry them crisp in hot lard, and serve them with hot sauce or mustard on the side. That crunch, it was music on your tongue. In 1965, when marchers came home from Selma, battered but unbroken, it wasn't steak waiting for them. It was fish ribs, cooked on back porches and roadside fryers, passed out in brown paper sacks with a nod and a prayer. It wasn't fancy, but it said, "You did good, baby. Now rest." Kids would fight over who got the crispiest edge. Elders would sit real still while they ate, like they were remembering something deeper than the meal. And in that quiet, you felt it. How something as small as a fried fish bone could carry the weight of a people. 6. Freshwater turtle stew. Out by the bayous and creek beds, folks used to catch snapping turtles with baited lines or bare hands if they were bold. That meat was tough, full of muscle, but when stewed low with onion, garlic, and maybe a pinch of cayenne, it turned tender like beef. The broth came out dark and rich, sometimes with a little roux stirred in. Some added hard-boiled eggs or okra to stretch it. Turtle stew was slow food, the kind that made you wait, made you sit, made you remember. Back in '63, during the weeks after the Birmingham church bombing, a family down in Louisiana served turtle stew to neighbors who came grieving. No words, just bowls passed from hand to hand, steam rising with the weight of sorrow and strength. That stew said what mouths couldn't. And when a young girl asked, "Why we eat turtle?" an elder leaned down and whispered, "'Cause it's hard outside, soft inside, just like us." That pot held more than meat. It held lessons. And in that quiet kitchen, with spoons scraping the bottom, you knew this stew wasn't just survival. It was testimony. 7. Squirrel fricassee, or fried squirrel. Squirrel wasn't no stranger in black kitchens, especially out in the country. Boys go out at first light with a .22 rifle or a slingshot, come back with a sack full of squirrels ready to skin. Sometimes they fried them whole, crispy on the outside, juicy inside. But other times, they'd make fricassee, brown the meat in a skillet, then simmer it in gravy with onions and carrots till it fell clean off the bone. Serve it over rice or biscuits, and you had yourself a meal that could hush a hungry room. During the long organizing weeks of the Mississippi Freedom Summer in '64, food had to stretch. Squirrel dishes brought folks together. One elder told the story of feeding 14 volunteers with 6 squirrels and a whole lot of gravy. Said it was the night they planned the march to the courthouse. Nobody asked for seconds out of greed. They asked because that squirrel tasted like unity. And when the youngest dipped their biscuit in that gravy, you could see it in their eyes. Hope don't need much meat to grow. 8. Rabbit and dumplings. Now rabbit? That was Sunday best meat in hard times. Folks would set traps along the fence line or shoot one early in the morning, clean it by noon, and have it bubbling in a pot before the sun dipped low. They'd cook it slow in seasoned broth, let the rabbit fall apart soft, then drop in hand-rolled dumplings, thick and doughy, soaking up every drop. It wasn't just warm, it was filling. A stick-to-your-ribs kind of love, passed down from Big Mama's hands to yours. Back in '61, when student protests lit up Nashville, A church elder made rabbit and dumplings for every teen that got locked up and released. She served it out of a dented pot behind the pulpit, told them, "Y'all fighting out there, I'll feed you in here." And they ate like kings that day, with bruises on their faces and courage in their bellies. Some of those kids never forgot that pot. Years later, they'd talk about that rabbit and dumplings like it was the first time they truly felt seen. Not as troublemakers, but as somebody's child, somebody's future. 9. Poke salad. Poke salad wasn't picked from no store. It came straight from the earth. Wild and dangerous if you didn't know what you was doing. You had to boil it 2, sometimes 3 times to get the poison out. But once it was safe, seasoned up with bacon grease, garlic, and a little onion, it hit the soul like a hymn. Old folks said eating poke salad taught you patience. You had to treat it right, or it'd turn on you, kind of like the world outside. That bitter green taught you how to work with what you had, even when it didn't seem fair. During the voter registration drives in rural Alabama, poke salad showed up on more than a few dinner plates. It grew in backyards, beside ditches, behind shotgun houses. And for families who lost wages just for registering to vote, it was one of the few greens that didn't cost a dime. Folks didn't brag on it, but they leaned on it, the same way they leaned on each other. That pot of boiled down leaves didn't just fill a plate. It told you, we gonna make it anyway. 10. Hot water, cornbread, or Johnny cakes. Ain't a soul who grew up in the South that don't remember hot water cornbread. Just cornmeal, salt, and boiling water, mixed till thick, shaped by hand, then fried in a cast iron skillet till golden brown. Crispy outside, soft in the middle. It was the kind of bread that never needed butter to be good. These little cakes hit the table when there wasn't time, or flour for biscuits. They cooked fast and filled you faster. And in homes where marches were being planned and leaflets printed by hand, hot water cornbread kept bellies quiet and spirits high. Back in 1968, after the Memphis sanitation strike and Dr. King's final speech, many households across the South served Johnny cakes in silence. Folks dipped them in beans, sopped up stew, or just ate them plain with a heavy heart. No words, just a taste of something that had always been there, solid, humble, unshaken. And maybe that's why we loved it so much, 'cause in a world that felt like it could fall apart, that little round cake never let us down. 11. Corncob broth with onion skins. When the cupboard was near empty and every penny mattered, folks turned to things most people threw away. Corncobs left bare after eating, onion skins too tough to chew. Boil them both slow, and you had yourself a broth. Golden, sweet, and full of flavor. This soup base was a quiet trick passed down through generations, especially during the lean years before and during the civil rights struggle. Folks would use it to stretch beans, greens, or whatever scraps they had left, turning waste into warmth. In '66, during long nights of organizing in Arkansas, this broth bubbled in borrowed pots behind churches. It wasn't about pride. It was about purpose. A warm bowl passed between hands reminded everyone, we may not have much, but we make something out of nothing. And somehow, even without meat or money, that pot still carried dignity. It told you, we don't waste a thing. Not food, not time, not each other. Kids learned early. Even the thrown away parts could give back if you treated them right. That lesson didn't stop at soup. It showed up in how we treated our people too. 12th, ash cake wrapped in collard leaves. Ash cakes were born straight from the ground. No pan, no oven, just hot ashes from the fire and a little faith. You took cornmeal, water, maybe a pinch of salt, and shaped it with your hands. Then you wrapped it in collard leaves and tucked it right into the embers. Let the heat do its slow work. When it came out, smoky, earthy, full of soul. Peel back them collard greens and you had a bread that told stories without speaking. During the long protests in Georgia, when folks couldn't afford flour or sugar, ash cakes were the answer. Elders made them in the backyard while the young ones came back from sit-ins, tired, hungry, but proud. That bite of warm cornmeal soothed the nerves and filled the gaps between anger and hope. Some folks use ashes from pecan wood or hickory, giving the bread a deep, smoky flavor you couldn't fake. Kids would fight over the crusty bits, burnt edges and all, because that's where the magic was. And when the bread cracked just right, steam pouring out, it felt like the earth itself was offering comfort. 13. Roasted pig ear slabs. Now, pig ears might sound strange to some, but back then, that was prized meat, cleaned real good, boiled till tender, then laid out flat and roasted slow until the edges crisp like bacon. Folks would slice them thick, drizzle on vinegar or hot sauce, and chew on that cartilage like it was candy. They were salty, savory, with just enough chew to make you work for it. But that texture, that flavor, it stayed with you. And in neighborhoods where supermarkets wouldn't sell decent cuts to black folks, we made the most of what others threw away and turned it into gold on a plate. One Sunday in Birmingham, a church fed 100 marchers after they walked miles in protest. All they had were pig ears and potatoes, but folks ate like it was a feast, laughed, passed plates, held hands, and for a moment, even the police sirens outside couldn't shake the warmth inside. Kids would gnaw on those crispy edges, sauce running down their chins, and elders would smile, remembering harder times. That plate reminded them, we didn't just survive, we seasoned the struggle. 14. Homemade Southern tea cakes. Soft, sweet, and simple. Tea cakes were the cookies your grandma made when sugar was scarce and love had to stretch. Just flour, butter, a little sugar, and maybe some nutmeg if you had it. Pressed flat by hand, baked golden, and cooled right on the windowsill. These weren't store-bought sweets. They were passed down in stained recipe cards in memory. In Mississippi kitchens during the civil rights years, tea cakes showed up after meetings, in lunch sacks, and on church steps. Mothers would wrap them in wax paper and tuck them into coat pockets, a soft reminder that somebody was waiting for you to come home safe. In 1963, after the Birmingham church bombing that took the lives of 4 little girls, Miss Elsie baked batch after batch of tea cakes. She said, "My hands can't stop the hate, but they can hold the dough." Those cookies became something holy that day, soft circles of peace in a world that had gone cold. Some elders called them freedom cookies, because even in the thick of fear and fire, they brought comfort, sweet and gentle like a hymn humming in the kitchen. 15. Salmon croquettes. You'd find a can of salmon in just about every pantry back then. Cheap, shelf-stable, and packed with protein. Mash it up with breadcrumbs, onions, a little egg, and season it right. Then fry it in hot grease till it sizzled brown on both sides. That's a salmon croquette. They were humble, but they filled your plate and your spirit. In many homes, they showed up on Friday nights right after payday, or when money ran low, but pride stayed high. Folks dressed them up with mustard, hot sauce, or a slice of tomato if you had one. When the Montgomery bus boycott dragged into its second year, salmon croquettes became the meal that kept folks going. Churches handed out lunch sacks to folks walking to work, and often inside was a croquette, still warm from a sister's skillet. It wasn't just a meal, it was a message. We got you. That little patty reminded folks that struggle didn't mean going without. Not when you had a whole community ready to fry up hope by the handful. 16. Virginia peanut stew. Peanut stew came from deep roots. Africa to the south, pot to the soul. Made with ground peanuts, onions, maybe tomatoes, and a touch of spice. It simmered into something thick, rich, and healing. Folks in Virginia swore by it on cold nights or long days when bellies groaned and spirits sagged. This wasn't your average stew. It wrapped you up like a wool coat and whispered, "You gonna be all right." Elders said it kept blood strong and bones steady. And during the civil rights years, it fed more than hunger. It fed courage. Protesters spooned it down before marches, its warmth rising all the way to their fists. In Danville, 1963, a woman named Mother Reba served peanut stew out of her home after every rally. Folks lined up quiet and tired and left with a full bowl and a stronger heart. She'd say, "Ain't no fear that don't melt in peanut stew." And truth be told, she was right. That stew wasn't just food. It was resistance in a bowl, creamy and bold, made from the same soil that tried to hold us down. 17. Spoon bread. Spoon bread wasn't bread like most folks think. It was soft, like pudding almost, made from cornmeal, milk, eggs, and butter. You had to scoop it with a spoon, hot and fluffy, right out the oven. Sweet or savory, it slid across the plate like a warm blessing. Down in North Carolina, spoon bread was a staple at meetings, funerals, and freedom rallies alike. It didn't matter how loud the world got. One bite of that creamy cornmeal hush, and you remembered where you came from. Folks would pass it around in cast iron dishes, each dip into the pan, bringing folks closer. During the sit-ins in Greensboro, mothers packed spoon bread into jars and carried it to the jailhouse. It'd be cold by the time it got there. But even cold, it stuck to your ribs and made you feel loved. Even kids called it church cloud because it was soft like heaven and always showed up when the choir sang loud and the prayers ran deep. And when you saw that golden top crack under your spoon, it felt like hope breaking through, soft, warm, and ready to rise again. 18. Callus. Early in the morning down in New Orleans, the callus women would walk the streets with baskets on their heads, calling out, "Callus, Bell's Callus." These were sweet rice fritters, leftover rice, a little flour, eggs, sugar, and spice, fried golden and dusted with powdered sugar. They weren't just breakfast, they were memory. Sold by black women long before the civil rights movement, callus kept the spirit of freedom alive through taste and hustle. They helped feed families, paid rent, and reminded folks that survival could be sweet too. When segregation kept folks from the front of the bakery, these women brought the bakery to the people. You'd hear their voices before sunrise, echoing through narrow streets, and by the time the sun peeked over the bayou, the smell of fried rice and sugar filled the air. And in the 60s, when marches passed through New Orleans, old-timers still made callus to hand out in brown paper bags. One bite, and you weren't just tasting fried rice. You were tasting black joy, resilience, and tradition, warm in your hand and never far from your heart. 19. Pepper pot. Women's cassava dumplings. They call them freedom dumplings in some corners. Thick, chewy cassava dumplings drop straight into bubbling pepper pot stew. These weren't delicate. They were heavy, filling, and meant to last. Made from grated cassava, salt, and a woman's knowing hand, they soaked up every drop of broth like a sponge for struggle and strength. In Philly, the pepper pot women, street vendors and home cooks alike, handed out bowls for pennies or for nothing at all if you couldn't pay. Their dumplings stuck to your bones, gave you the energy to keep moving and the comfort to know someone cared. Back during the 1964 Freedom Summer, volunteers remembered those dumplings more than the speeches. Long nights, organizing voter drives turned into warm meals shared around one pot. Stories traded with steam rising between bowls. And when a spoon hit the bottom, all you saw was cassava and courage, thick with history, quiet power, and the hands of women who stirred freedom into every bite. And long after the stew was gone, the memory of those dumplings stayed, like the sound of a strong woman's voice carrying through the streets before the sun came up. 20. Pan-toted service pan hash. This was the kind of meal built from scraps. Yesterday's meat, leftover rice or grits, maybe a spoon of beans, all fried up together in a dented tin pan. Folks called it service pan hash because it was carried to the fields, the factories, and the protests in pans wrapped in cloth or tucked under arms. In the Jim Crow South, where black folks couldn't sit at no lunch counter, this was how we fed ourselves. Women would tote these pans to factory gates or church steps, lifting the lids to share with anyone who needed it. The smell alone, spicy, smoky, honest, would make your stomach call out like a choir. During the marches in Selma, when bodies were tired and feet were blistered, pan-toted hash showed up like an old friend. Shared from one lap to another, it gave just enough strength to stand back up, face forward, and keep on walking. You couldn't buy it in no restaurant. You couldn't box it up. This was food from the soul, carried in hands that had held babies, picked cotton, and still had the strength to stir a pot for somebody else. 21. Butlered ham jowls stew. Ham jowls ain't just scraps. They're the secret meat, hidden under the cheek, rich with fat and flavor. When simmered slow in a stew with onions, peppers, and maybe some okra or greens, they turned tender as a lullaby. Folks called it butlered when it was seasoned real fine and cooked long with love. This dish was Sunday special in many homes, especially when money was low, but spirits were high. The meat clung to the bone just right, and when it hit your tongue, it tasted like home. Black families passed down the method quiet and proud, knowing jowls fed both stomach and story. In Montgomery, during the carpool drives of the bus boycott, families would gather after dark, passing around steaming bowls of jowl stew to drivers who'd been on the road all day. It kept them warm, kept them fed, and reminded them they weren't doing this alone. And when that pot scraped empty, folks would mop it clean with bread crust, nodding slow. Because in that stew, you could taste what it meant to endure and what it meant to be loved through it. 22. Fried frog legs or crawfish patties. Now this one came straight from the swamps and bayous where folks knew how to pull a meal from the mud. Frog legs were cleaned, seasoned, and fried till crispy like chicken wings. Crawfish got chopped, mixed with cornmeal and spices, then pan-fried into patties that sizzled like summer. Down in Louisiana and parts of Mississippi, these weren't strange foods. They were everyday blessings. Folks fished them out at dawn, caught by hand or net, and cooked them up by noon. Some say the best ones came from church fish fries, where the line wrapped around the block and the grease never stopped popping. In 1965, after the march from Selma to Montgomery, a small church just outside Baton Rouge hosted a homecoming meal. They had no money for beef or pork, so they brought in what they could catch, frog legs and crawfish, and the people ate like kings, not because of what it was, but because of what it meant. And when that first bite hit, juicy, spiced, and wild, it told you something plain. We might not have much, but what we got, we make beautiful. 23. Boiled peanuts and collard potlikker blend. Boiled peanuts were the snack of the South. Soaked in salt water and boiled till soft, almost creamy inside. And potlikker, that was the deep green broth left behind after cooking down collard greens, thick with nutrients, memory, and soul. Poor folks didn't waste nothing. They'd take the potlikker, pour it into mugs, and sip it slow, hot, salty, and healing. Mix that with a handful of warm boiled peanuts, and you had a medicine stronger than any pill. Elders swore it cured colds, heartaches, and heavy days. In Albany, Georgia, during voter registration drives, neighbors handed out jars of potlikker to tired organizers. It was cheap, yes, but rich in every way that counted. It gave energy to feet worn from knocking on doors, and peace to minds weighed down by hate. And when someone passed you a bowl, they weren't just feeding your body. They were saying, you belong here. You matter. And we'll get through this together. Some folks even crumbled cornbread right into that potlikker, soaking it up like a sponge. That last spoonful, it felt like a hug from your grandma. Warm, strong, and just what you needed to carry on. 24. Gullah Sea Island Pepper Pot. This wasn't your everyday stew. Gullah pepper pot came from the Sea Islands, simmered slow with okra, tomatoes, seafood, and garden herbs. It was thick, spicy, and bold, like the language and spirit of the Gullah people themselves. You could smell it cooking before you even got to the porch. Back in the day, this pot fed whole families after long days in the fields. Folks would toss in shrimp, crab, sometimes fish heads, whatever the tide gave them. Okra thickened it up. Tomatoes gave it tang, and that broth. It clung to your spoon like history hanging on. During the Civil Rights Movement, when organizers came through the coastal lowcountry, Gullah elders made pepper pot for them. They called it freedom stew, something sacred you only serve to the brave. It kept bellies full and spirits lit like a lantern in the dark. And each spoonful held the rhythm of the islands, strong, steady, and rooted deep. It reminded folks where they came from and gave them the fire to keep marching toward where they were going. 25. Field greens and sorrel herbal drink. Before sodas and sweet tea filled up tables, folks quenched their thirst with what the land gave them. Sorrel, bright red hibiscus petals, got steeped with ginger and clove, sweetened with molasses or honey, and served cold in tin cups, sometimes mixed with foraged field greens like dandelion or sassafras. It wasn't just a drink, it was a tonic. In Mississippi and Alabama, this herbal brew was sipped on porches and packed into jars for long train rides to rallies. It cooled the body after hot days in the sun, calmed nerves before facing police lines, and reminded people of the old ways that kept them strong. One elder called it marching juice, said when the world got heavy, a swig of that sorrel would clear your head and put strength back in your legs. It wasn't sweet like store-bought drinks. It was bold, earthy, and honest. And every time it hit your tongue, it reminded you, the roots we drink from run deep, and they carry everything we've been through, bitter, sweet, and everything in between. Now you've tasted a piece of our past, not just in food, but in fire, in family, in fight. These 25 forgotten soul foods didn't just fill stomachs. They fueled a movement. They were passed from hand to hand, cooked over protest fires, served after marches, and remembered in silence when words fell short. Every bite told a story of mothers who stirred hope into pots, of fathers who fried courage in cast iron, of children who sipped strength from soup bowls. So if these dishes stirred something in you, a memory, a hunger, a pride, don't let them fade again. Share this video, pass it down, keep the taste of our history alive. And if you want to go deeper, hit that subscribe button. There's a whole table of stories still waiting to be served.